Warm-up don'ts. Don't use a warm-up service. Not just because of the 30 to 40 thing, because there are warm-up services that you can go way higher than that. Don't use a warm-up service because it's against the terms of use for most of the tools you'd be using. And it's a great way to get your domain disabled or your account disabled. And the way that I know that for dang sure is that when somebody does a sweep, like Facebook does a sweep, and everybody that's in violation of some strange little tiny part of their policy that no one even knows, it's in, line 52,001, all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, I got my account shut down. And then you start realizing you got your account shut down, you did too. Well, the SMTPs do that as well. And so I get a lot of messages that says, hey, and it's not even I got my account shut down, because often they don't know. They're just like, hey, my email stopped working. I'm not sure what's happening. I'm hoping you can help me with it. And on those days, that's when I find out there's a sweep being done for warm-up services. And then there's a whole bunch of people who find out pretty quickly that their account was shut down because they're using something like warm-up inbox on the back end. That's a great question. Let me answer that. So the question was, what makes a warm-up service a bad thing? Like, why would somebody have a problem with that? I had those questions too when I first started this. The reason that people have a problem with it, or not people, but like those companies, is because a warm-up service usually indicates that you're about to send a bunch of cold email. That is a pretty spam-like behavior to have a warm-up service on your domain. Anybody who's doing cold email is running warm-up on their domain for a minimum of 3 weeks before they ever send a cold email. That's just a standard procedure. So when you turn on a warm-up service on your domain, what it basically says is I'm going to send to people who don't necessarily want to hear from me. So I need to boost my stats and stuff so that when I start sending, if some things kind of go wrong, I've got a little bit of a buffer. So don't use a warm-up service. I just don't want a message from you saying that Mailgun shut down your account or something like that. I will tell you that every single time that's happened, not even one have I not been able to help you get re-enabled, but it's because there's an aha moment and there's a confession of, I did this thing wrong, and I now know what, it's like a parent and a child, right? What'd you do wrong? How are you fixing it? How are you making sure this never happens again? Don't send too much too fast. So that 100 a day, or 100 on day one is a thing. On that warm-up I was showing you where it went a little higher than I wanted it to, I think it was like 362 that went out. So I did kind of hold my breath for a minute. And I was like, well, all I can do is just keep going. I won't know Google's opinion for another couple of days. And it worked out okay. I've sent out as much as 500 and been fine. And I've seen people who've sent out 1,000 or 2,000 and been fine. But the caveat to that is they had a solid list that they'd been talking with them already. These were people who were not going to let them down. But the other side of that is the SMTP may have a problem with that much going out, especially depending on how fast you send it, because they may see that as spam-like behavior, regardless of how people respond to it. They may just decide that you're sending out a little too much too fast on that brand new baby domain, and they don't really like the way that looks. And so they might throttle you. And then don't continue to send if your KPIs are off. So if you don't have opens in the 40s, if your bounces and complaints aren't those numbers we talked about earlier, the thresholds we talked about, then we need to pull back. Don't send the next day's email. We're looking at KPIs before we hit send every single day. Day one, I send 100. The next morning I get up, Tanya, I should say, gets up because it's not really me anymore. She does a lot of this. She gets up, she maybe gets on a call with the new client who's just starting their warm-up, and she says, okay, let's walk through your KPIs before anything else happens. She's looking at it with them to help them understand what they're looking at, where they're trying to find the information, and what is that information telling them. And if we see any red flags with those numbers, well, then we don't send the next 200 or whatever day we're on. We just don't do it. We go, okay, let's pull back and figure out, why are those complaint rates so high? Why is the open rate so low? We have to figure that out. And then if you do all this really well, you'll be rewarded with that little baby, tiny blue dot right there on the high line. It's exactly what we want. That's usually going to show up on day 3 or 4, because it takes, like I said, a couple, 3 days for Google to have their opinion displayed for you. And then you keep going and you continue that. So now you're going to have a nice high domain reputation that's going to go for days because you're doing this warm up, this ramp up thing. When you're ramping up, the next question that I often get from people is, well, how long do I have to do this? How far do we have to go? And I don't know the answer to that because I'm not sure what volume you're trying to get to. So if you're trying to get to a couple of thousand emails in a day, I mean, you'll be done in about 4 days. If you're trying to get to a couple 100,000, well, then we have some work to do. Also, I'm going to ask you, why are we sending to 200,000 people as your norm? Like, why is this the number we're trying to hit? I get that you might want to do it once in a while. So I'm thinking if we get you to 100K, and then we want to hit the whole list, if we have a strategic way of doing that, that might be okay, because you can still double. Remember, you can go from 100 to 200,000. So I really just need to get you all the way up to like, what is the step right before where your top out is? And then I really want to talk with you about what is the purpose of sending to the whole list? Is this really a good strategy for what you're trying to accomplish? Because it might not be.